Have you ever found yourself wondering why some people seem to just, climb the ladder in life, while others, maybe no matter how hard they work, feel kind of stuck?
Yeah, it's something a lot of people experience.
Perhaps you're juggling a job, maybe two jobs, going to school, paying bills, and you still have these dreams of a better future.
But you're watching the cost of everything, rent, groceries, just keep going up and up.
Exactly. If that sounds familiar, well, you're definitely not alone.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into social stratification and poverty, particularly in America.
Our mission really is to unpack the structures behind these realities, to move beyond just individual stories, important as they are, and try to understand the systems at play.
It really is a profound paradox, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The United States is, by many measures, the richest country on Earth. We produce trillions more in goods and services than even, say, China.
Wow.
Yeah, our economy is larger than the combined economies of Japan, Germany, the UK, India, France, Italy, put together.
That's immense wealth.
Immense. And yet, despite this abundance, we have more poverty than any other advanced democracy.
That contrast is just so stark. Almost 1 in 9 Americans overall, and 1 in 8 children live below the official poverty line.
That's over 38 million people who can't consistently afford the basics. It really makes you question how we got here.
It does. The author Matthew Desmond, he captures this so powerfully when he talks about his own life.
Right, his family losing their home.
Yeah, to the bank, and him working multiple jobs, Starbucks barista, telemarketer, even a wildland firefighter, just to scrape enough together for college.
And he talks about that shock, seeing, quote, bald scarcity amid such waste and opulence right around his university.
People begging just blocks from, like, an artificial lake built in the desert.
Yeah. And his experience, it really highlights how these aren't just isolated problems. They reflect deeper patterns. Which brings us neatly to our first key concept, social stratification. So, think of this as the way society organizes people. It puts them into a kind of hierarchy based on factors like wealth, income, education, occupation, that sort of thing.
So it's not random placement.
Not at all. It's about structured inequalities. Inequalities that are built into the very fabric of our social systems.
Okay, so it's not just about how hard one person works. It's about the societal blueprint itself.
Exactly. And within that blueprint, we often talk about a class system.
Right.
Now, unlike more rigid systems from history, like slavery or caste systems, a class system, in theory, allows for movement.
You can move up or down.
Supposedly. Your social position is primarily achieved, meaning, you can climb or fall based on your efforts and opportunities.
But as we're going to see, that ladder isn't always as easy to climb as it might seem.
That's where we need to get clear on the difference between income and wealth. People mix these up all the time.
Yeah, let's break that down. Income first.
Right. Income is the money you earn from work, from investments, your paycheck, basically, or maybe what you make from a side gig.
Got it.
And what's really crucial to grasp here is that income inequality in America is going up. The growth in real income over the last century, it hasn't been shared evenly at all.
So most people's paychecks haven't kept pace with, say, the cost of living or the gains at the very top.
Precisely. And then there's wealth.
Okay.
Wealth is the total sum of money and material stuff you own. Your house, savings, stocks, bonds, cars, everything. It's what you have, not just what you earn right now.
And why is that distinction so important?
Well, many experts argue that wealth, not just income, is the real indicator of social class. Because it's much more stable, right? It's less sensitive to, losing your job for a few months or income going up and down.
It's the safety net, the foundation.
Exactly. And it's also where those racial disparities really hit hard. The wealth gap between Black and white families, it's basically as large today as it was back in the 1960s.
Wow. Still.
And tied to both income and wealth are life chances.
Life chances. What does that mean exactly?
It means the opportunities individuals have to improve their situation, their material success. Access to crucial resources, think quality education, healthcare, even just healthy food options.
And your social background, your class position heavily influences those chances.
Absolutely. It shapes everything from the neighborhood you grow up in to the schools your kids can attend, the networks you have access to.
Which leads us right into social mobility.
Right. Social mobility is just the movement individuals or groups moving between different social positions.
And there are different kinds, aren't there?
Yep. 2 main types we talk about. First, Intergenerational mobility. That's movement across generations. Like, are you doing better or worse, economically speaking, than your parents were?
Okay. And the other?
That's intragenerational mobility. That's movement within your own lifetime. You start as a cashier, maybe work your way up to store manager. That's intragenerational mobility.
Both are pretty central to the whole idea of the American dream, right? The ability to move up.
Definitely. And one last definition we need is the poverty line.
Ah, yes. The official measure.
Right. It's the government's threshold to define who officially lives in poverty. In 2022, it was set at $13,590 a year for one person.
13,000. That doesn't sound like much at all.
It isn't. For a family of four, it was $27,750 a year. And this number, it was originally based on a kind of rough estimate of food costs back in the 60s.
And it often falls way short of capturing the actual cost of living today, with housing, childcare, healthcare.
Exactly. It's a flawed measure, but it's the official one we use.
Okay, so with those definitions, stratification, class, income, wealth, life chances, mobility, poverty line, let's talk about how this actually looks in the U.S. How is the class structure broken down?
Well, sociologists usually identify a few major classes. At the very top, you've got the upper class.
The 1%.
Roughly, yeah. About 1% of households. Average income's way up there, around $2.6 million. These are the highly affluent.
And within that group, you mentioned different kinds of wealth.
Right, that's important. There's a difference between old money wealth that's inherited, passed down generations.
Like the Rockefellers or something.
Kinda, yeah. And then new money, which is wealth earned through work or entrepreneurship. Think tech billionaires, successful entertainers, globalization, the information revolution. That's really fueled the rise of the super rich.
Okay. Below the upper class.
We have the broad middle class. This is generally folks in white-collar jobs, lower managerial positions. But this group is feeling squeezed.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. People saying they don't feel middle class anymore.
Exactly. The number identifying as middle class has been declining. Costs are rising faster than incomes for many. Within this, you have an upper middle class, highly educated professionals, mid-level managers, often with advanced degrees, more job security.
Then comes the working class.
Yep, about 30% of American households. These are typically folks in blue-collar jobs, manual labor, service industries. Household incomes generally between, say, $31,000 and $53,000 a year.
The people building things, fixing things, providing essential services day to day.
Absolutely. And overlapping quite a bit with the working class is the lower class. That's about 29% of households. Incomes typically below $31,000 a year.
And this is where we find the working poor.
Yes. People who are employed, often full-time, sometimes holding down multiple jobs, but they still can't make ends meet. They live below or very near the poverty line despite working.
That story about Julio Pays you mentioned earlier, it really drives that home.
It really does. A Guatemalan immigrant back in 2014 working 80 hours a week, 2 full-time minimum wage jobs, McDonald's, and a temp agency.
80 hours, just to afford a shared room.
Just to afford a shared room with his family, he described feeling like a zombie, fainting from exhaustion, and his little 8-year-old brother asking him,
"How much for 1 hour to play with you?"
"Yeah, I want to buy 1 hour of your time." It's heartbreaking. It shows this isn't just about low income, it's about the sheer human cost, the lack of time, the exhaustion.
Julio's story isn't just a one-off, is it? It illustrates how entrenched these systems are. Which brings us to the big question. Why is class position so sticky in America? Why is it so hard for so many people to move up?
It really comes down to structured inequalities. Your starting point, your social class, is often deeply intertwined with other factors, race, gender, even geography, where you happen to live.
Though the experience isn't the same for everyone, even at the same income level.
Absolutely not. The experience of, say, a black woman can be vastly different from a white woman or a black man because of how race and gender intersect with class.
Let's talk about those racial and ethnic disparities. They seem critical here.
They are profound. Poverty rates are much, much higher among minority groups. Black and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately working in the lowest paying jobs, and they face ongoing racial discrimination in the labor market.
Hasn't that gotten better over time?
Shockingly, studies show basically no progress in labor market discrimination against black job seekers in the last 30 years.
Wow. And the wealth gap.
Staggering. As we said, the median white household has a net worth around $188,200. The median black household, just $24,100.
That's a huge difference.
It means, on average, A white household with just a high school diploma often has more wealth than the average black household with a college degree,
More wealth with less education just based on race.
based on accumulated generational wealth and lack thereof due to historical and ongoing factors. And this translates into real-world differences in neighborhoods, schools, safety, even life expectancy. Poor white families tend to live in communities with lower poverty levels and better resources than poor Black and Hispanic families.
Okay, so race is huge. What other systemic factors keep people stuck? You mentioned education.
Education is a big one. How much and what quality of education you get is heavily influenced by your parents' social class. School quality varies wildly, right? And it's often linked directly to neighborhood wealth and racial makeup.
Because schools are largely funded by local property taxes.
That's a major part of it. Plus, you have historical factors like white flight after desegregation, which drained resources from urban schools, and things like California's Proposition 13, which slashed property tax revenues for public schools statewide.
So the system itself can limit educational opportunity based on where you live.
Definitely. And housing itself is another factor. Housing segregation is still very real. Poor neighborhoods often become mortgage deserts, places where banks just aren't interested in lending for affordable homes.
But landlords still operate.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And landlords in poor neighborhoods can often charge higher rents relative to property value and make more profit per unit than landlords in wealthy areas.
How does that work?
Because tenants have fewer choices. They're trapped by lack of income, credit history issues, discrimination. It's been called predatory inclusion. The system includes them, but only to exploit their lack of options.
That's grim. What about government help? Doesn't that level the playing field?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. We hear a lot about government aid for the poor, but what's often overlooked are the massive, often invisible government subsidies that benefit the wealthy and middle class.
Invisible. Like what?
Think about the mortgage interest deduction on taxes, huge benefit, primarily for homeowners who tend to be wealthier, or 529 college savings plans, tax advantages for saving for college, mostly used by families who can afford to save. Employer-sponsored health insurance is another big one. It's subsidized through the tax code.
So wait, the rich actually get more government subsidies than the poor?
The data suggests yes. The top 20% of income earners receive almost 40% more in these kinds of government subsidies annually than the poorest 20% receive in direct aid, like food stamps or housing assistance.
That completely flips the script on who benefits from government spending.
It really does. It shows that affluence isn't just purely self-made. It's often significantly subsidized by government policy. Yet, ironically, the folks benefiting most are often the loudest voices against government handouts for the poor.
This ties into Matthew Desmond's core idea, doesn't it? That poverty isn't just an accident or a personal failing.
Exactly. He argues it's often a feature of the system, not a bug. The system, in some ways, produces and maintains poverty alongside wealth.
Can you give an example of how that plays out for an individual?
Think about the story Desmond tells of Crystal. Born prematurely after her pregnant mother was stabbed, bounced between 25 foster placements by age 18, diagnosed with mental illnesses, she gets just $754 a month in SSI disability payments.
Okay.
73% of that tiny income goes just to rent for a rundown apartment. And she can't even get into better subsidized low-income housing because she has an old assault charge from a fight when she was a teen in a group home.
So the system blocks her even from the help that's supposed to exist.
It pushes her right into the private rental market where she's easily exploited because she has no other options. Her poverty isn't just low income, it's a lack of choice, a vulnerability created by intersecting system failures.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
Immensely. And this leads to what some call the bandwidth tax. Poverty isn't just lacking money, it's a constant state of scarcity, of juggling impossible choices. This creates chronic stress that literally eats up cognitive resources, your brain power.
Like, it makes it harder to think clearly.
Exactly. Research shows being poor can reduce cognitive capacity more than going a full night without sleep. So people under that constant pressure might make decisions that, from the outside, look ill-advised or stupid to those of us not dealing with that scarcity.
It's a direct result of the condition itself.
It's a systemic drain on human potential.
Okay, so this really challenges the narrative about social mobility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The myth versus the reality.
It absolutely does. We talked about intergenerational mobility doing better than your parents and intergenerational moving up in your own life. How easy is that climb in the U.S. today?
The data suggests not very easy, especially compared to the past.
Right. Think about wages. For decades after World War II, Workers' real wages grew steadily, like 2% a year on average.
People felt like they were getting ahead.
Yeah. But since around 1979, real wage growth has slowed to a crawl like 0.3% a year. For many Americans, their actual purchasing power today is roughly what it was 40 years ago.
40 years of stagnant wages for a huge chunk of the population.
And that dream of doing better than your parents? In the late 1960s, about 90% of Americans earned more than their parents did at the same age. By the late 1990s, that number had dropped to only 50%.
50%. So upward mobility is basically a coin toss now. It's no longer the defining American experience.
It seems that way for many, and while education is still incredibly important, a strong predictor of success.
Not a magic bullet.
It's not a cure-all, no. We've expanded things like Pell Grants, increased college enrollment for low-income students, which is good, but it hasn't solved the underlying issues for everyone.
How so?
Well, in 2020, almost one-third of full-time workers aged 25-64 who had a bachelor's degree still earn less than the national median income.
So even a college degree doesn't guarantee a middle-class life anymore for a significant number of people.
Not necessarily. And compare that to, say, Germany. Only about 35% of their young adults have a college degree, much lower than here, yet their child poverty rate is half of ours.
So just pushing for more degrees isn't the whole answer. There are deeper structural things going on.
Exactly. Which really forces us to ask, is America truly the land of opportunity for everyone, or are there major barriers built into the system?
What are some of those barriers? We talked about wages.
Yeah.
What else contributes to this stagnation?
A huge factor is the decline of unions. Labor unions historically gave workers significant bargaining power.
They fought for better wages, benefits, working conditions.
Right, but union membership has plummeted. Some point to moments like when President Reagan fired 13,000 striking air traffic controllers in 1981 as sending a powerful signal.
That management could take a much harder line against unions.
Exactly. That corporate America could effectively crush them. This led to a big decline in worker power and contributed significantly to wage stagnation for non-college educated workers especially.
And alongside declining union power, we've seen the rise of bad jobs.
Yes, absolutely. Think about the gig economy, Uber, DoorDash, TaskRabbit, all those platforms.
They offer flexibility, supposedly.
They do, but often at a steep cost. These models extend corporations' ability to classify workers as independent contractors, not employees.
Meaning no sick days, no overtime pay, no health benefits, no retirement contributions.
Often no minimum wage guarantees. It shifts all the risk onto the worker. These jobs make it incredibly hard for people to gain stable economic footing and climb that ladder.
Okay, so wages, unions, job quality. What about the safety net? Doesn't welfare help? There's that common criticism about welfare dependency.
Right, the argument that government aid discourages work and creates dependence. But the research often doesn't bear that out.
What does it show?
Most welfare reliance is actually temporary. It functions more like insurance against a temporary setback, losing a job, a health crisis. People use it to get back on their feet.
Like that experiment in Stockton, California.
Exactly. They gave 125 low-income residents $500 a month, no strings attached, for 2 years. Universal basic income pilot.
And the critics probably expected them to waste it.
That was the fear. But the study found they overwhelmingly spent it on basic needs. Groceries, utilities, rent, car repairs to get to work. Less than 1% went to tobacco or alcohol. And full-time employment actually increased among recipients compared to the control group.
Interesting. So the money provided stability, maybe allowing them to find better work.
It seems so. It reduced income volatility month to month. And another point. Billions of dollars in aid already set aside for the poor goes unclaimed every year.
Unclaimed? Why?
Not usually because of stigma, but because the application processes are incredibly complex, confusing, and burdensome. People can't navigate the bureaucracy.
So it's not necessarily a lack of willingness to accept help, but barriers to accessing it.
Often, yes. So when you put all this together, stagnant wages, weak unions, precarious jobs, complex aid systems, systemic discrimination, it paints a picture where climbing out of poverty is incredibly difficult, regardless of individual effort.
It really challenges that simple pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
It really does.
So given all these complex systemic issues, what can be done? Are there potential solutions?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And look, there are no magic wands, no single easy fix for problems this deep-rooted, but we can talk about some grounded, realistic reform ideas. Think of these as starting points for critical thinking, based on research and real-world examples, not just abstract theories.
Okay, where do we start? Empowering workers seems key.
Absolutely. A direct approach is raising the minimum wage.
But don't businesses argue that'll kill jobs?
That's the classic argument, but many economic studies, like a famous one comparing fast food jobs in New Jersey and Pennsylvania after NJ raised its wage, found negligible effects on employment. And we see positive examples. Emeryville, California, raised its minimum wage to nearly $18 an hour by 2022. Remember Julio Pays?
The guy working 80 hours?
Yeah. That higher wage in Emeryville allowed him to cut back his hours, save a little, feel safer, as he put it. We also need to talk about ending subminimum wages.
Like for tipped workers, they can be paid just $2.13 an hour federally.
Exactly.
Yep.
That needs to go. And we need mechanisms for periodic, humane reviews of the minimum wage so it actually keeps pace with the cost of living.
Makes sense. What else for workers? Unions.
Strengthening worker empowerment is vital. Maybe restoring unions to their old peak is difficult, but new models are emerging.
Like what?
Movements like the Fight for $15, often backed by existing unions like SEIU, are organizing entire sectors, not just one shop, but all fast food workers in a city, for instance. It's called sectoral bargaining.
So they bargain for standards across the whole industry in a region.
Right. It has a strong track record in Europe, raising wages and standards for millions, including gig workers. It could be a powerful tool here for workers at places like Amazon, Starbucks, fast food chains.
Okay, empowering workers is one piece. What about housing? That seems like a huge barrier.
Huge. We need to improve housing access. First, strengthen public housing. It often gets a bad rap, but there are successful, well-designed, modern examples like Villa Verde in the South Bronx or Bent Tree in Austin.
And the research shows benefits.
Yeah, research indicates kids growing up in stable, subsidized housing are healthier, have less lead exposure, do better in school, and even have lower incarceration rates and higher incomes as adults. It's an investment in opportunity.
Beyond public housing, what about making homeownership more accessible or just finding affordable rent?
Good point. Often, families pay way more in rent than they would for a mortgage on a similar place if they could just get the loan and down payment. Remember those mortgage deserts?
Where banks avoid lending in poor neighborhoods.
Right. We need to tackle that. And the legacy of things like redlining that historically shut Black families out of homeownership and wealth building. Maybe innovative models like tenant-owned cooperatives could help too.
Like tenants buying their building together.
Exactly. There's a group in Minneapolis, Inquelinx's Unit Access Portage Zisha, who did just that, bought buildings from exploitative landlords, created a community land trust, and saw rents drop.
That's empowering.
Yeah.
What about building more affordable housing in general? There's often so much resistance, not in my backyard, or MIMBYism.
That's where inclusionary zoning comes in. New Jersey is actually a leader here. Their state courts require towns to provide their fair share of affordable housing.
And it works.
It's resulted in thousands of affordable units being built, often without direct state or federal subsidies. And studies consistently show that well-managed, integrated, affordable housing has basically zero negative effect on surrounding property values.
So the fears are often unfounded. How do you encourage more places to do this?
You could use incentives, maybe extra federal funding for communities that embrace inclusionary zoning, or sticks potentially withholding federal funds from localities that maintain exclusionary zoning practices that lock poor families out.
Okay, workers, housing. What about just basic access to money and banking?
Critical. We need to ensure fair access to capital. Right now, we basically have two banking sectors, one for the affluent, one for the poor.
Meaning check cashing places, payday lenders.
Exactly. Banks make literally billions from things like overdraft fees, $11 billion annually, check cashing fees, $1.6 billion, predatory payday loan fees, $9.8 billion. These disproportionately hit low-income Americans.
Fees for being poor, essentially.
Pretty much. Banks could offer affordable, low-interest, short-term loans, but they generally choose not to. They profit from the fees. That needs serious reform.
And education. We said it's not a cure-all, but it's still important.
Vital. But maybe the focus shouldn't just be on getting more people into college, but on improving K-12 for everyone, especially through integrated schools.
Integrated schools. How does that connect?
Well, studies going back to the aftermath of Brown v. Board of Education consistently show that Black children who attended racially and socioeconomically integrated schools did better academically, graduated at higher rates, and were less likely to be poor as adults.
And did it hurt the white students?
No. Research shows it didn't harm their outcomes. Integration seems to benefit disadvantaged students significantly without negatively impacting more advantaged ones. So policies like inclusionary zoning that lead to more integrated communities and schools could have powerful long-term effects.
That's really interesting. Are there other areas, maybe things individuals can do?
Definitely. Consumer activism is one. We can all try to vote with our wallets.
Like boycotting.
Or boycotting, actively supporting companies known for fair labor practices. Research the companies you buy from. Do they pay a living wage? Offer benefits. Treat workers with dignity. Look for certifications like B Lab's B Corp status. Think about the poverty impact of your spending, not just the environmental impact.
So using our consumer power for social good.
Exactly. It all adds up.
This is a lot to take in, but understanding these systems feels powerful.
It really is. Understanding is the first step. It's about more than just economics. It's about dignity, human potential, collective well-being. And, it's important to remember, we've made progress on poverty before. It's not an intractable problem.
Like during the 1960s.
Precisely. The War on Poverty, the Great Society programs, things like the Food Stamp Act, Head Start, Medicare, Medicaid, they actually cut the share of Americans living in poverty in half within about 10 years.
Wow, cut it in half. Even with all the political turmoil of the 60s.
Even then, it shows that significant change is possible when there's political will and public pressure. Ordinary Americans found ways to win major reforms.
And are there similar movements today?
Yes, absolutely. We're seeing the rise of what some call fusion coalitions.
Yeah.
Groups like the Poor People's Campaign, led by Reverend William Barber, or the One Fair Wage Campaign, led by Saru Jayarman. They're intentionally bringing together people across racial, religious, and even political lines.
Bridging divide.
Trying to. There was this amazing moment in Albany, New York, where MAGA protesters actually joined forces with Fight for $15 activists because they both wanted higher wages from the state legislature.
Seriously. That's unexpected.
It highlights what Saru Jayarman says. We are not polarized from each other. We are polarized from our electeds.
Yeah.
On many core economic issues like raising the minimum wage or taxing the rich fairly, there's actually broad public agreement across party lines.
So the potential for common ground is there.
It is. So we'd encourage you, the listener, to think about becoming what Desmond calls a poverty abolitionist.
Abolitionist, that's a strong word.
It is. It means actively working to dismantle the systems that create and perpetuate poverty. That could mean divesting from exploitative practices in your own life, your shopping, your investments, maybe even the company you work for.
And getting involved locally.
Yes. Show up at those town planning board meetings when they're debating affordable housing. Don't let the NIMBY voices dominate. Tell your local officials, build it. I refuse to deny other kids the opportunities my kids enjoy just by living here.
Taking a stand in your own backyard.
Exactly. We need to fundamentally shift our mindset from one of scarcity, this idea that there's not enough to go around, that helping the poor must hurt the middle class.
To an economy of abundance.
Right. This country has enough resources for everyone to live a decent life. As Desmond points out, the dreams of the rich often become realities, while the dreams of the poor are dismissed as outlandish. Why?
It forces a hard look at our priorities.
It does. Ending segregation and poverty, creating real opportunity, it will require adjustments. Affluent families might need to give up some hoarded advantages, like exclusive access to the best schools or neighborhoods.
That's a difficult conversation.
It is. But Desmond argues that in giving up those things, we'd also give up the shame that haunts us when we participate in the evil business of exclusion and poverty creation. He talks about his own experience moving from a less wealthy but more connected community in Madison, Wisconsin, to an affluent Boston suburb with less joy, calling it a bad bargain.
Trading community for exclusivity.
Perhaps. And it makes you wonder, how many artists and poets has poverty denied us? How many diplomats and visionaries? How many nurses and engineers and scientists? Choosing individual financial gain over collective well-being can lead to a kind of disfigured humanity.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
And maybe one more for you to reflect on. It cannot both be true that excluding poor people from high-opportunity communities enriches the lives of those inside the walls while degrading the lives of those outside, and that tearing down those walls and welcoming people in will come at no cost to the current residents.
Something has to give.
Something has to give. So the question becomes, what is the real cost of maintaining our current system of inequality, and what could be the profound gain for everyone if we truly decided to share our nation's incredible bounty?